Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, January 26th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we continue our position preview series. We begin with the first of multiple installments focusing on the outfield, the way things are scheduled to work, as we will have 4 episodes covering outfielders. That last one, though, will be UT only players up front and very late outfielders in the back. So if you're wondering where those guys who don't qualify anywhere are going to go, they are going to be a part of that episode. And I'm going to guess Shohei Ohtani is going to be on the thumbnail for that one because that seems to be good business in general based on what I know about YouTube.
Yeah. All right. I look forward to this because I need a distraction right now. But also outfield is just an interesting thing because it's a little bit like pitcher where you can play in leagues where it's like center field, left field, right field, and that makes things a little bit harder. But generally, the fact that these are disambiguated, like it's just outfield and you don't have to, you have 5 slots to fill, but you don't have to get specific kinds, means there's an opportunity to wait because you don't need to fill certain kinds. And then on top of it, outfitters are so disparate in what they bring to the table that you don't fall into that like, I need 30 steals from my MI or something. You can get all kinds of outfielders. You can get power guys, you can get batting average guys, you can do whatever you need. So I think it's one of those things where I'm tempted to always let it slide, but the best players are in the outfield. There's so many good hitters in the outfield that you still have to invest in it. You can't just go into the season with a bottom third outfield, I think, because you'll just have left too much talent on the table.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it. The ability to get anything you need from this position kind of gives you the opportunity to adjust to what you did with other parts of your foundation, right? You don't have a lot of first basemen that steal bases, for example. So there's all sorts of things like that along the way. Even third baseman, you get a couple guys that run, a lot of guys don't. So you can adjust accordingly with your outfield balance, since just about every combination of categories can be found out there.
I think you that's an interesting point, though, because it is harder to make up speed at like first or quarter infield or whatever it is. It does put some pressure on you to get steals from your outfield. Right. I mean, or just getting steals from the outfield takes pressure off of getting it from your infield, which it opens up the more, like, you can get Colson Montgomery late at shortstop if you hit running hard in the outfield.
Yeah, you could get Corey Seager as your shortstop and Colson Montgomery as your middle. Get the shortstop middle combo that doesn't run if you load up with enough steals in the outfield. So yeah, kind of a blank canvas as far as what you can get from the position. If you'd like to continue the conversation after this episode, you can join our Discord, like this video if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and be sure to leave us a nice rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Let's dig into the top of tier 1. I split this into A and B because these are outfielders that go within the first 2 rounds. This first group mostly goes inside of round 1. That group, of course, includes Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Corbin Carroll, Ronald Acuña Jr., Julio Rodríguez, and Fernando Tatis Jr. Plenty of superstars in that bunch, and I always feel like we're picking nits when we talk about guys like this, or giving people maybe reasons to reconsider pairing them with someone else as part of their early round roster builds. But starting with Judge at the top, I have no nits to pick. If there is a wart, I am not seeing it. Yeah, he turns 34 in April, but he's really showing no signs of slowing down. From an overall draft board perspective, he's kind of the consensus number 2 pick behind Shohei Ohtani. And I think some of the previous durability concerns we had from earlier in his career have faded a little bit with 2 healthy campaigns now as he approaches his mid-30s. And really the injury at Dodger Stadium back in 2023 was pretty fluky. Slammed his foot into a concrete slab below the outfield wall. So at this point, I mean, I have no argument against Aaron Judge as the number 2 player off the board and as the first outfielder atop any set of rankings.
Yeah, me neither. I guess, he's 6'7", so you wonder how that'll age with respect to his past injury concerns. Again, it's just the nits. It's I wouldn't keep that from taking him. And I've said before, like, Rick Smits couldn't stay healthy, but wasn't Rick Smith's like 7'4" or something? Like, there's got to be some like difference between being 6'7" and 7'4". Right?
Yeah, and I also think playing a sport on hardwood versus a sport that's on grass could also have an impact on your joints too. So yeah, there's some variables there that are important to keep in mind. But I don't think we need to wax poetic about Judge. He's just phenomenal, a perennial MVP candidate and a great foundational piece. You draw that number 2 pick, you're pretty happy with what you get from that. I think it gets a little trickier to project Juan Soto though, because he went 38 for 42 as a base stealer last year, pushed his career high in homers from 41 in his lone season with the Yankees to 43, his first on the mega deal with the Mets. And over the course of his career, he's just shown us a bunch of different things. I mean, we saw him hit 313 over a full season in 2021. We've seen him hit 40 homers twice. We've seen him go over 30 on 4 different occasions. We've seen elite OBPs year over year over year. It just seems like Juan Soto can make adjustments that other players can't make, and that somehow adds almost like a creative, fun sort of volatility to his profile, which would ordinarily like be extremely safe for most other guys that could do some of the things that he does.
Yeah, I mean, Antoine Richardson is gone, the first base coach that so many credit with Juan Soto's excellence on the base pass. I just think with a pop up like that, anything's really possible in the stolen base category. I would just assume, I kind of would regress heavier. I'd be, the bat X gives him 17 versus Oopsie gives him 22 stolen bases to Juan Soto. So I'm more on the 17 side. And then the only other thing that sort of occurs to me is that he's got this like, all fields approach, and the power may drop at some point. Just think of like Joey Votto was hitting, a lot of home runs in his peak, but then, he didn't hit as many on the way out. There's a lot of Votto. There's a lot of Votto in Soto. And he'll always be super valuable because of the high OBP and stuff. But there is some, distance between how valuable Joey Votto was in fantasy versus in real life, unless you were in an OBP league. So there's some little bits there, but I think it's probably too early to focus on those. He's 27. He's great. The other last thing is his home BABIP was, like 40 points lower than his away BABIP. And it's, is he going to change at all his approach to that stadium, or is he just going to run lower batting averages and balls in play going forward? That will affect his batting average, which has ranged from, for Juan Soto's ranged from 242 to 313, 351 in the short season. So he's, there's a lot of variability here. It's how many stolen bases we give you, what kind of batting average we give you, and even a slight bit of how much power he'll give you. I mean, he did swing the bat harder over the course of the season, but he himself has had, pretty disparate home run totals. It wouldn't be crazy if he hit 29 homers next year.
No, it wouldn't be. And if he went back to stealing 15 or 20 bases, his previous high before last year was 12. I mean, like, that wouldn't be stunning, but there's just so many things he does well that it seems like if he's healthy, Juan Soto returns at least late first round value. So even though you got to use a top 5 pick to get him right now, and you don't know exactly what the balance of those categories is going to be, it's going to be good enough to get you basically where you need to go at the cost. So
really high floor.
I'm looking more for like 20 bags this year than what he did last year, but he showed that is a part of his game that could be here for a little while. And he's still 27, right? This isn't when Freddie Freeman started running more in his 30s. This is a guy that's close to his physical peak. So those Votto comps, some of the downside concerns, they are pretty far off on the horizon for me. I think it's that average, as you mentioned, that might be the category where he could be the most suspect, relatively speaking. Again, phenomenal player. Corbin Carroll. What's going on with Corbin
one of these next 3 outfielders I could see easily surpassing Soto, actually. I think in terms of like possible ceilings and floors and stuff, like
I think there's the three in this group that go behind Soto. Carroll, Acuña, and Julio Rodríguez probably have enough ceiling to be 1-1 picks in a world where Shohei Ohtani doesn't do what he does as both a hitter and a pitcher anymore. So in the pre-Ohtani world, these guys were threats to be 1-1. And Acuña was 1-1 even in an Ohtani world at one point. But anyway, Carroll doubled up that barrel rate last year. And I think when you pair that with a third year of mostly staying on the field. I think that eases some of the concerns we had about the health of his shoulder earlier in his career. Do you see an MVP ceiling with Corbin Carroll? Do you think he's going to continue delivering pop like that for these next couple of seasons?
I do. I just, it's so hard to dub that, but because he still plays in the same league as Ohtani, right? So it's like, he's not about to start pitching. And what could he do, over last year? I think, one thing that stands out for me is that he could combine his best strikeout rates with his best power. I don't think it's impossible for him to kind of find the ideal approach for himself. He talks to me when he talks about hitting, about making that there's always like a give and take. Like if you do something to cover over here, you might open up over here. So when I see that he has become more upright in his stance, and is, has gone 2 more inches out in front in terms of getting the ball, I think that he has decided that like there's enough power to, opportunity to go get the ball, to be more upright, to make himself more vulnerable at the top of the zone, to strike out more in order to lift the low ball more and hit for power. But what if he kind of figures out how to have both swings in there, both approaches in there, starts really anticipating what's coming? Then he has a year where he has a 19% strikeout rate, 12% walk rate, 35 homer power, steals 40, 50 bags, and has good defensive numbers. Not great because he won't be playing center. I think he could push that. I mean, it was 6.5 WAR last year. When you do an MVP season, that's what you do. You put all those things together and you get, 7-8 win season, and maybe, Ohtani doesn't pitch all year or something, like it's, or he's got some sort of injury. I mean, that's the whole story. But otherwise, I believe in the power gains. I think that there actually could be another level just because he's a really hard worker. He's 25 years old, and Corbin Carroll has like whiffed less in the past. And you could have, if you put that whiff lessing together with the power, like that's the next level.
Yeah, it's an impressive profile. I think the interesting thing is for a guy that runs well and hits the ball hard, the batting average for his career is down at 258. And even last year when everything was going really well, it was a 259. He runs lower BABIPs than I expected. It's not like a Trey Turner situation. Like that's been the one thing about Carroll that confuses me a little bit, but no qualms about making him a centerpiece of your team in the early part of round 1, which is generally the case, of course, with this entire group. Acuña is kind of interesting to me just because I wonder how much he's going to run now that he's further removed from the second ACL tear. He went 9 for 10 as a base stealer last year, so very efficient when he ran, and that was coming off of the injury, and it was only 95 games. The power looks like pretty easy 30-plus home run power. Average looks good, and the blip we saw in K rate in 2023 when he only struck out 11.4% of the time in his 41 homer, 73 steal season, it's a clear outlier because we've got 4 years, 2 on each side of the season around that, where he's been in the 23 to 24% range. So I think we do have a pretty good sense of where his plate skills are at. They are very good. They're probably not going to be among the league leaders in lowest K percentage, which is fine.
But it's weird.
It's weird. It's weird that he did it because you're like, how did you do that?
And it's affected his projections. You see the Steamer projection, right?
Yeah.
Steamer's the one who's like, nah, he's going to strike out 20% of the time. You're like, that's not who he's been,
It fights my brain. My brain is like, no, he's 23 to 24%. We've got enough evidence to say that's what it is. I can't explain 2023. I just can't with Acuña.
Yeah.
But
just a great season. But, when that happens, when Steamer does that and it weighs maybe that season, that great season more than the other projection systems, what you get is Steamer likes Acuña. So when you look at the players that Steamer likes the best, versus like an oopsie, Acuña's on there. In fact, Acuña is tied for Soto in Steamer value as basically a $40 player. And you see other players that, the other players that Steamer likes better than oopsie are guys that are kind of established veterans. So there's maybe some sort of there's some sort of aging curves in here. There's Cody Bellinger, Jose Altuve, George Springer, Brandon Nimmo. But then also Tatis Jr. is on here. So there's a little bit of difference here in terms of how maybe strikeout rate is being projected. Maybe bat speed affects strikeout rate. Maybe there's different things where oopsie, just thinks they're going to have higher strikeout rates. So he's 28 and he's had these 2 amazing, seasons, and then a lot of, sort of difficulty in between, injury and okay seasons and stuff. I kind of feel like it might be time for another amazing season. I don't know. This is not science, but it's like, look at this dude where like every couple of years he pops off an MVP level season, and like this year is like the last year that he had that was so amazing is like the year after he's come back from injury, like he always has the first year back from injury where he's like, it's not so great. And then this is when he had the great season last time. So I'm in on Acuña, man, if he's available to me. And I've taken him ahead of, Julio is probably the other guy that makes me think the longest, but like I'll easily take him ahead of everybody that's behind him. Do you take Acuña over Carroll?
I think I probably would. The quality of contact for Acuña is just elite, right? I mean, 15% barrel rate, again, coming off the second knee surgery. I think he owns the ability to hit the ball hard into all fields. I think we see that reflected more in his BABIP, where that batting average floor is a lot higher. I think that can be a little bit underrated. So even if I end up giving up 15, maybe even 20 bags, depending on how much Carroll runs versus Acuña, I think I'm comfortable getting that higher average floor. I think the power might be better from Acuña, and the run production should be at least similar, if not better, from Acuña as well.
Steals are also it's an interesting thing. They don't like map that closely to sprint speed. They map a little bit closer to times to first, as Jeff Zimmerman has found. But even then, mapping steals hasn't been super successful from like, let's just look at the skills and we'll find all the base stealers, right? Like you can't just look at sprint speeds and times to first and be like, those are the base stealers. It doesn't actually work that way. You have Soto stealing 38, and so I think there's like an intentionality with steals, and that's what we found is that like if your team steals a lot in spring training, they're going to steal more in the regular season. That's a Jason Collette finding. There's all these like different aspects to, stealing is a mindset. Stealing is a vibe, dude. And I feel like if Acuña starts off well and he thinks that like MVP might be in there for him, I think he'll steal more. I don't know if it's like, I don't know if I'm describing too much like sort of I'm not saying that he's bad makeup or he's personal goals over team goals, but I could see him just being like, this could be another one of those like, 40, 70 years. I just have to steal some too.
I think it just comes down to feeling good for Acuña too. If his legs feel good, I think he's going to have that part of his game firing at least on an elevated level, maybe not at a league leading sort of clip. 73 seems just ridiculous.
Yeah,
highly
also age really badly. Steals,
but he's 28. Badly. So 20 to 25 bags seems fine. Plenty of power to go along with it. Julio Rodríguez is part of this group as well. I remember a conversation we had with Jed early in the year when Julio wasn't rolling yet back in the first half. And I wonder how much of the struggle was approach driven versus, cooler weather, or maybe it's a combination of the two. But if you kind of pull back and take an analog approach to the season as a whole, the improvement to a 21.4% strikeout rate is really nice. And it's a really short list of players that are going to go out there and average 28 homers and 29 steals a year in their first 4 big league seasons. So I think you're getting incredible floor, and you're still getting the possibility that we have not seen Julio Rodríguez's best big league season yet.
Oh yeah, that's the thing I'm excited about, because he swung harder than ever in the second half with his shortest swing. So you're kind of like, oh, okay. So even the swing aspects are kind of coming together. He had a 560 slugging in the second half. Now, yes, his slugging is for his career 150 points higher in the second half. So Julio Rodríguez does play in a park that's kind of cold, but I think this is a tremendous athlete that's putting the skills together around it. Sort of learning the soft skills of the game, learning when to swing as hard as, learning when to kind of try to pull the ball and when not to. And I think it's been maybe a little frustrating for people at times because everyone sees that he has MVP type upside, and then he'll have a bad month or two. And, everyone's sort of like, what's wrong with Julio? And I think that there's nothing wrong with him. It's just a young player learning how to make the most out of what he's got. And I think this is what's so fascinating about baseball is I think that you could I love the athletes because, what I see as the aging curve, what's happening is your athleticism is basically just falling away as you play the game. You're just less and less of an athlete every year, but you are learning the game. Like you're learning the game, like the rules of the game. And so, that's why I think the peak in baseball is a little bit later, frankly, than most other sports. I think there's a lot of sports where you can just, rely on your athleticism and be put in the right spots by your coaches and stuff. I'm thinking of like a running back in football. It's like they're gonna block schemes for you, and you just have to be an amazing, strong, fast athlete, right? I'm not saying there's those things smart about it. I'm just saying, like, I think that relies a little bit more on athleticism. Baseball, you're trying to anticipate how you're being pitched. You're trying to learn when to like put your swings, the right swings on the right pitches. And I think Julio's just in the middle of that. And I think we have yet to see his peak season. And that's what's so exciting, is to take somebody who's been so great, so far, and then put him into, what could he look like in a peak season?
Really quick question. If you drew the 4th pick where Soto has been going, it's been going Ohtani, Judge, Witt in most drafts. Are you taking any one of Carroll, Acuña, or Julio in that spot instead, right? Because you can obviously choose the break with ADP. It's often a good idea. I'm just curious what you'd actually do if you drew pick number 4.
Pick number 4. What are my would you rathers with everything?
Outside of outfield, you'd have Jose Ramirez sitting there. You could get the first starter off the board with Tarek Skubal. You could throw Ellie into that spot. If you like Skeens more than Skubal, Skeens would be available at 4. I mean, I'm just assuming Ohtani, Judge, and Witt are the only 3 players off the board in most of those scenarios.
Yeah, that's a really a tough one for me, because I have when I do my KDS, which is a Kentucky Derby system where you can pick where you want. I like the first 3 picks, and then I've actually pushed some of the late first round picks up, because I feel like I can get one of Acuña, Rodríguez, or Tatis in the back end of the first round, right? So what I'm trying to do is have an earlier second round pick and take who I want, which is a way of weaseling out of your question. I think I would,
but you should think about the combinations beyond the first 2 rounds of what's likely to be there and how you like starting a roster that way. It's not even just the first 2 players; it's like the first 6 players.
Yeah, and in draft and hold season, there's like a closer cliff, where you're like either going to get one or you're not. I would. Okay. Let me just compare them to the 2 shortstops, because Gunnar and Ellie are very exciting players, but I would take all these guys over Gunnar and Ellie.
Okay, all of them over both. So you're gonna, for now, say I'm withholding my judgment on what I would actually do with pick number 4. But if you draw it, you're going to be thinking very carefully about which one of the outfielders after Judge you'd actually possibly take in that spot. I know there's a little bit of a break after Tatis, but I think Tatis could kind of go either way for me in terms of my expectations.
Yeah, not sure that I would take Tatis over the shortstops. Yeah,
I don't think I would. And I think I like him a little more than the outfielders we're going to get to in the next group, but I'm honestly not sure. And the reason is, like, you think back to PED suspensions over the years, production pre-suspension in the power departments, and then production after suspension. And I don't recall, and maybe I got to do some more digging, I don't recall as steep of a fall off in power for anyone who's been in that situation as we've seen for Tatis. And I realize his shoulders and there's other factors in play here. It's not just that, but this is a guy that in his first 3 seasons in the league slugged .590, .571, and .611 between 2019 and 2021. And in the last 3 seasons post-suspension has slugged .449, .492, and .446. And he's still young, and he does a lot of things really well. I get why he's still a late first-round pick, but I'm just wondering, is the power ceiling where it used to be with Tatis? Am I right to have reduced expectations, or do we have some evidence that he's starting to make some adjustments at the plate that might help him tap into maybe a midpoint between where the power was and where the power has been these last 3 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, another way of looking at it is like Steamer, which it seems like what we're finding from Steamer is like further away information is still relevant, more relevant to Steamer, because Steamer projects Tatis Jr. to have the highest isolated slugging percentage of any projection system. And so I think the Steamer is still getting some signal from that 42 homer season in 2021, where you're making the argument that maybe we shouldn't be getting any signal from that. Maybe it really is what the bat says, a 203 ISO, topping out at 27 homers. And I think that's a fair thing to say. But then, I also look at him from the perspective of here's a guy who's been, it seems like, really focused on improving his strikeout rate. So there's this other thing going on while his power is dipping and there's this post-suspension thing going on. He's improving his strikeout rate, right? And so is he in sort of the parlance of Corbin Carroll, is he making different trade-offs? Is he saying, I'd rather put the ball in play and not hit 35, 40 homers, but, have a higher OBP, have a higher batting average. And so the way you do that is you let the ball travel a little bit. And so we can look at him and we can say, oh, should he go get the ball? And I just put together a little chart here, which just shows his K percentage, his slugging percentage, and his intercept point. It's a little bit of a busy chart, I'll admit, but if you look at the highest intercept points, what you'll find is really good slugging around it, but you also find higher strikeout rates. So in his furthest out in front month was September 2024. He was out in front 32 inches. He had a 580 slugging and a 27% strikeout rate. So you do see on a month basis, September 2025, Fernando Tatis Jr. was out 32 inches out in front. He had a 550 slugging. He had a 23% strikeout rate. So there is a relationship between getting the ball out in front and slugging and striking out. And I would suggest that it's possible that a different hitting coach, I'm sure Tatis has his own people and he's making his own decisions. And some of this stuff has been going on for 3 years and he has had different hitting coaches over 3 years. But it is possible that Tatis has a different hitting coach that says, hey, let's go get the ball. And I don't care if you strike out 25% of the time. I want to get you into 35 homer territory. So I think that's still in there. And I like that he's still running. And I feel like the floor is really high. In fact, I think the floor for Tatis Jr. is higher than the one for Kyle Tucker because stealing seems to be more of an intentional part of Tatis's game. And I like the quality of contact about the same for the two of them. And I just think that Tatis has a little bit more upside in terms of putting together power and speed at 27 years old.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be on the Tucker side of that toss-up at least once in a while. If I get that draft position more than once, I'll explain why here once we get to that next tier. But with Tatis, I guess the thing you got to keep in mind too, much like a lot of these outfielders on this episode or this part of this episode, he just turned 27. He's still at an age where, closer to peak physically, regardless of where peak actually is, closer to peak physically. And that's worth keeping in mind. There's lots of ways he can still get there and maybe be an earlier first round pick as we think about 2027. We want to hear from you. You listen to us all the time. We're asking you to fill out a quick survey about you and your podcast habits by going to theathletic.com/survey26. 3 lucky entries will win $100 worth of Amazon vouchers. So whether you're a longtime listener or you just started listening recently, we want your feedback. Go to theathletic.com/survey26. That's theathletic.com/survey26. The link will be in our show description. All right, we don't usually talk about top-end players in this show because we're looking for risers and different things happening all over the other parts of the pool. So this is kind of the exception episode where we really dig in on some first and second rounders for a good chunk of our time. But the next group, Tier 1B, early second rounders to late second rounders, Kyle Tucker, Jackson Chourio, Pete Crow-Armstrong, and James Wood. I would say based on what happens in drafts, Tucker and Chourio are a little closer to the first group, and Pete Crow-Armstrong and James Wood fall a little bit later to that round 2, even beginning a round 3 sort of turn. With Tucker, I just look and say, hey, this is a great setup. Phenomenal lineup. Counting stats should be elite. I just wonder how aggressive he'll be on the base pass because the Dodgers were 22nd in steals as a team last year. Some of that's having an older roster and just not really pushing some of those guys to run if that's not the sweet spot of where they're at in their career. Around injuries in Chicago last year, I think Tucker was showing us early first-round value, but that second half really dragged everything down for him. 25 for 28 as a base stealer. He's efficient every single year. 11 for 11 in 2024, 30 for 35 in 2023. I just don't know how aggressive the Dodgers want him to be or how aggressive he wants to be. He does have opt-outs in that deal eventually, so proving he can do everything might still be really important for him on an individual sort of level. And obviously, if you're as efficient of a base stealer as Kyle Tucker is, it's still a good net positive for the team. So do you think he's truly a 5-category stud, or do you think the stolen bases could wane just a little bit with the Dodgers?
I mean, I think the power is a little soft too. I mean, he does have these 10% barrel rates, but a 10% barrel rate isn't what it used to be. We referenced that piece by Ben Clements about, they don't make barrels like they used to. And here's a way of saying it. Kyle Tucker's 10.1% barrel rate, it was in 2022, was 46th best among qualifiers. His 10.8%, which is higher, was 56th best last year. So, the power is improving around him, and his power just looks, I think, like it's good. I just don't think it's elite power. His steals, his base running, I don't think it's elite. I think it's good. A lot of the stuff that the concerns I have over a long-term contract go out in terms of the contract and his fit for the Dodgers. But they are still there for me, where I kind of I worry that, I don't know how like non-elite, but bat speed and put in running speed age. You know what I mean? Like it should be fine for a year. I'm not too worried, but I do worry a little bit. And so I just think Tatis has, better tools. I don't know if Tucker has better skills, maybe, in terms of walks and strikeouts. Kyle Tucker was 22nd. The Dodgers were 22nd in bat speed last year, but they were top 8 in hitter came on his BB. So, this looks like something where this might be a Dodgers thing that they target. They don't target bat speed the same way some other organizations do. But for Tucker, one last thing that is real positive for him. He's going from the 19th best park for lefty homers to the 4th best. So whatever worry I have about the bat speed translating to homers, it could easily be papered over by just a change in park. He was a lot better player away from Wrigley last year.
Yeah, I think that's going to keep the floor in a really, really nice spot, and the ceiling with the counting stats he can bring is excellent. So I'm a little more Tucker than Tatis. If you said you only get one bite at the apple from that back part of the round, I'm probably going Tucker with that spot instead. I get the case for Tatis. Chourio, I think, is really interesting because he's got an aggressive approach, and he got even more aggressive in year 2, 40.6% O swing, up from 34% as a rookie. But he did lift the ball more often, barreled it up a little bit more often. Looks like a 30 home run hitter in the relatively near future, maybe as soon as 2026. You wonder what kind of ceiling a player has with a 5 to 6% walk rate. I mean, I think the best comp I keep throwing at Chourio every year is Julio. But even to this point in Chourio's career, he hasn't shown as much in-game power as Julio did in his first 2 seasons. The gap is really small. We're talking about extremely exciting young players. Defensively, I think he's a lot better in a corner than he is in center. Not really a problem. He's going to be in the lineup every day either way. That hamstring injury in the second half that came back in the postseason is really your primary injury concern, but it's all Field's power. It's just with a pretty aggressive approach that we don't usually get excited about at the very top of our boards.
Yeah, it's true. Where does a Brewers team put a guy with a 317 career on base percentage in the lineup? That matters a little bit. You can lose plate appearances. You lose, I think, gosh, what is it? Do you remember what the number was? Man, it's like, I think you lose like 15 or 20 plate appearances per lineup slot, going down from the first lineup slot.
Yeah, it adds up, but at the same time, how far down does he go? It's the answer's not that far, because he's their best
third, fourth, yeah.
Where did he hit power hitters in that lineup? You trust him the most. I was gonna see what the actual breakdown was. I mean, they moved him around a little bit. I mean, he let off some last year, 26 times, but he was this number 2 hitter 83 times. And again, considering he missed some games with injury, like that kind of explains why there's a little bit of a gap. He hit third on 11 occasions, at cleanup 10 times. He's a top half of the order hitter for them, somewhere inside the top 4, even though the OBP has run a bit low. And he's still young enough where the plate skills could improve. He could walk a little bit more. He could become a little bit more patient. So there's ways for him to make it work.
You know that I have a bias towards, the bad X and, barrel rate and, demonstrated power in terms of these process stats that come from Baseball Savant. And, you know, Chourio does come up a little bit short when you look at him through the lens of batted ball quality. I mean, it's good, but it's not, he doesn't, there are other players are all around him that are better. Even Kyle Tucker, who I just besmirched his, quality of contact, is better. So what we have is an 8.8% barrel rate from Chourio, which means he does hit the ball hard and in the right angles, but not as much as other power hitters. The thing you do have to remember though, and I forget this all the time, is when you're 21 years old, you can just grow your barrel rate, right? Like it doesn't just because he had like a 9.7% barrel rate. Like just look at from 24 to 25. It went from 7.8% barrel rate to 9.7 in the second year. So he could easily come out this year, and if he barrels 14 or 15% of the time, just with some physical growth or just some better anticipation, what pitchers are trying to do to him, that's that natural growth that you're hoping for from a 21-year-old. So I can see, getting him. It's just that, the would you rathers here in terms of ADP of like other players, of all players, around Chourio is, there's a lot of established players. You could take Nick Kurtz, you can take Vladimir Guerrero Jr. right close to him. You can take Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Jazz Chisholm Jr. I mean, there's just a lot of people who've done it already. Christopher Sanchez is right there, so like it's just a little bit of an awkward spot for me in terms of demonstrated results and upside. I haven't gotten him yet. I don't know if it's, I don't know that I dislike the player, but it's just a combination of me hewing pretty close to my projections, which say he's probably not, supposed to go where he goes, and maybe having other alternatives at the same time.
Yeah, it just costs you a lot for a guy that's been great. 270s in the average department, 2020 each of his first two seasons. You just don't know if that big step is coming this year, if it's a little further down the road. But I understand why people do it in part because, Jazz Chisholm's got a pretty bad injury history. Kyle Schwarber's UT only, has that batting average liability. Pete Alonso's in a new place. Maybe you don't want to snag Yamamoto there. Like there's a few like flaws, again, relative flaws in the alternatives as well. So it's a funny little spot in the early part of round two where you have to decide what you're really comfortable with if you're sticking to ADP and not jumping somebody up well ahead of where they usually go, or if someone doesn't fall to you in a spot unexpectedly, which does happen on occasion. So I get why people take them there. I don't know if I'll have them in more than like a league or two at that price, even though obviously I love Jackson Chourio. I want him to be a superstar.
Yeah, a little nugget that's kind of fun before we get into the next guy is just that by my comp dollar values where I took Steamer, the Bad X, and Oopsie and made an average dollar value, by my comp number versus ADP, every single player is going exactly where they should so far in this draft. In our theoretical draft. So like all 8 outfielders are ordered exactly correctly according to the the consensus projection number.
Yeah, so the market might be using the same methodology at the top of the board.
It really seems that way. Yeah,
not particularly surprising, but good to know that we're not on an island, at least at the very top of the board. Pete Crow-Armstrong, I think, could be pretty polarizing because if you're looking for a tooled-up player who chases even more than Jackson Chourio does, that's PCA, right? He's a superlative center fielder, phenomenal. The defense is going to keep him on the field even against lefties, and even though it was oddly shaped, 31 homer, 35 steal season last year is just absurd. Like even the most optimistic PCA fans probably weren't expecting that this quickly. The concern, same-handed pitching, lefties, 27.2% K rate with a 59 WRC plus. He's going to get buried in the lineup against those lefties. But again, I think the glove keeps him in there, and maybe he gets a plate appearance or two against some righties a little bit later in the game. Not necessarily easy righties, given that they could be leverage guys. All that is to say, like, I think the biggest concern people would have is that it almost seemed like the league figured him out. Like they had a game plan that was working really well in the second half. Only 6 of his 31 homers came in the last 61 games. It was a 72 WRC plus during the second half. It's a very, very pull happy approach. We're talking 7th among qualified hitters in pull air percentage. What I see when I look at Pete Crow-Armstrong is actually kind of a a left-handed Carlos Gomez in terms of what he does from a roto perspective, what his current flaws are, and not having to pay a first-round pick for a player like that makes him kind of exciting. But I think for years, there was always that hesitation with Gomez that because he wasn't an on-base machine, that maybe you were taking on a little bit too much risk early. So do you see a similar risk profile with PCA where he's going in the later part of round 2?
I mean, my comp is Javi Baez, but I see a fair amount of risk. I mean, I think one of the questions you have when somebody gets quote unquote figured out is how long do they make an adjustment back to what's happening to them? And I just think that players that have shown that they swing at almost half of the pitches they see outside the zone, and they've shown that pretty regularly. In fact, I think, this is a little bit more conjecture than proven fact. But I've done some studying of this. I don't think that your chase rate changes much. I think that's one of the most innate parts of a hitter. So, if you do have this 45%, chase rate, I think as a player, it behooves you just to be aggressive, because you don't have a great sense of where the zone is just innately. And so you should just be more aggressive so that you swing at more, pitches that are inside the zone. You don't get into 2 strike counts and take strikes 3s and stuff like that. So I wouldn't counsel him to, really tighten up the zone and don't chase, I would say, I think you should just be aggressive, and it's going to be really streaky and it's going to be up and down. And you could have an MVP type season. I don't know which ones it'll be. I think you could have a very bad season too. I think you could have a 85 WRC plus season that would still be great on the field because he's such a great defender. I think he might be the best defender in the game across all positions. We've seen that even the great defense he put up before was affected by the sun in more than any other player in baseball. He got more sun balls. So I think he's the best defender game. That'll keep him on the field. If you're okay with the risk that he hits 230 with 25 homers and 40 steals, then I think you should be even fine with this pick. But I do think that is a risk.
Right next to PCA, you have the opportunity to take James Wood, another young player that I think brings a lot to the table to get excited about. We saw improvement in his ground ball rate when he debuted in 2024. It was a 55.6% ground ball rate last season, got that down to 49.7. New hitting coach in DC could be a big boost for Wood and the other young hitters there. And the quality of contact is already really good. It gives you a good idea of the ceiling. How about a 16.3% barrel rate, 56.3% hard hit rate overall? He just needs to hit it more often. He had the 16th lowest zone contact percentage among 145 qualified hitters last season. There are some really good players around that part of the leaderboard. Like Shohei Ohtani lives pretty high up on that leaderboard too. The issue right now, fastballs up and in, sliders and changeups down and away. You mentioned it with Judge. I mean, being large, having a big strike zone to cover, I think presents a unique challenge. And I think that's mostly what we see with Wood. Up and in fastballs when you're 6'7", probably hard to get to. Down and away, sliders and changeups, probably hard to get to. And then there's the experience factor of just getting more accustomed to what teams are trying to do to you and attacking maybe a little earlier in the count, that he could still make a toggle like that, continue to do a lot of damage, and avoid some of the strikeouts that we've seen so far. I mean, the other way to think about this, consider that Aaron Judge had not even reached the big leagues at Wood's age, and he's already got more than 1,000 big league plate appearances. So I think there's a ton to like in this profile, and I would say you really shouldn't be scared off by the strikeout rate because you're giving up on a guy that does a lot of things very well if that steers you away.
Yeah, and he doesn't have that chase rate. And, at 23 years old, you'd expect that strikeout rate to improve. And in one way that I would point out that the strikeout rate seems likely to improve, there's actually 2 ways. One is that his swing strike rate at 12% is nowhere near, like a PCA's number, right? This is a 12%. The league average swing strike rate is like 10.5. So he's only barely over the league average swing strike rate. And then you look at, how often does he swing at pitches inside the zone? And he's really passive. The league average zone swing rate is 65%. He's at 54%. So I think that, some selective aggression could really help him. And yeah, I think he's to put up a season like he just put up with 31 homers and 15 steals at 23, 22 years old. Like that was just so impressive. I'm pretty much in, like if the quality of contact for Jackson Chourio can get better, then what happens when Wood's quality of contact gets better when he gets older, right? Like it's already at 16% barrel rate, like you mentioned. So I love him. The only thing that I think is a real negative is that they were DHing him a fair amount last year. And I think when you see Steamer, put up a 513 plate appearances for Wood, I think it's partially because they're worried that either he'll get platooned, that Steamer is a projection. It's projecting plate appearances for James Wood. So it's looking at second-year players with X amount of platoon split and maybe some defensive value where it's like, hey, he has no defensive value. So he may be taken out of games early, this, that, the other thing. I don't think that 513 play appearances is correct projection for James Wood, but I think it might be directionally correct in a way. Like you can maybe take the under on the other guys, all the other projections, say 640, 650. Maybe it's more like 600 because they were playing him at DH. And the other thing about DH, the last part about James Wood is that you are worse of a player as a DH than you are in the field. It's called the DH penalty, and hitters are 10% worse when they have to come cold off of the bench. And I think some guys like David Ortiz learn how to not have that penalty just by being top step and doing whatever it is, sometimes getting on the bike. There's all sorts of different things you can do. I wouldn't say that he has learned how to be a DH yet. So I would hope that he plays in the field next year and that he improves his defense somewhat. And so the weirdest thing for me is if I told James Wood to work on one thing this offseason, I think it would be his glove.
Well, and it's an organizational wide issue for the most part too. So new front office, new coaches. I think there's room to buy into some improvement, but even just what he does as a hitter, I think James Wood already belongs in this spot. I'd take him over PCA right now. I think you could probably move him up even a half round or so and take him over a Jazz Chisholm, take him over a Kyle Schwarber, a Pete Alonso. I don't think you're wrong for moving him up above some of those guys if that's that's what you're looking for that well-rounded player already that could go off to a new sort of level. A little bit of a break though before you get to the next tier. You kind of around the pick 50 mark. You see Wyatt Langford, Brent Rooker, Roman Anthony, Jackson Merrill, Riley Greene, Jarren Duran, and Byron Buxton, all kind of lumped together within a span of about 25 picks or so in a typical draft. So pick 50, pick 75 overall. And again, these are leagues that require you to get 5 outfielders. So, we're gonna have a lot of outfielders getting plenty of juice as a result. Langford was hurt quite a bit last year and still got to 2020, right? He had hamstring trouble as a rookie. It was oblique injuries that got him last year. When I look at that profile, I don't see a 247 hitter. Like he runs pretty well. I think the thing that's working against him a little bit is he's pulling a lot. Like he can crush fastballs, but he does have a little bit of an overall pull tendency. So while you might look at those averages in the minors and think, oh yeah, he's a threat to hit 280, 290, he's probably more like a 265 type guy when things are going well, like that 265, 270 range. But with that power speed combo and where he's going to be in that Rangers lineup, to me, this is just a bet on health. If he's completely healthy for a full season, 25 or better seems within reach.
I mean, it is one of those things where he does everything under the hood that I want him to. He has a 10% swing strike rate, so he should probably improve his strikeout rate. He does not chase, 26% O swing. That's a good chase number. He hits the ball hard, 48%. League averages under 40%. Best power hitters are over 40%. He's nearly 50%. 50% is a real demarcation to like the best hitters in the game. 14% barrel rate. So you can't even say, oh, it's a soft barrel rate, 10%, no, it's 14%. And he has the bat speed. He has the foot speed. They're going to play him in center, they say. This could be just the time for him to renounce his arrival and take that large step forward in his third season. And if he doesn't, you don't get left holding the bag. If he doesn't, and he's just a 250, 22 guy, it still will have a lot of value. And I think the floor is higher than PCA. That's why I might take him over PCA as well.
Yeah, I think what you're getting right now in draft and hold leagues for prices on Wyatt Langford probably won't be what you'd get at the draft table in March, a lot of places too. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if he crept into like the middle of round 3, early part of round 3, and became a little more of a toss-up with the likes of Wood and PCA as more and more drafts unfold. I think it's funny that Brent Rooker gets jammed in here by ADP because I think Roman Anthony is actually a lot like Langford in terms of having this really nice floor for a guy that hasn't spent a lot of time in the big leagues yet. Hard hit rates have been phenomenal. I mean, only 71 games in Boston last year because he did have an injury that cut that rookie season short, but plate skills have been great everywhere. 60.3% hard hit rate upon arrival, 15.5% barrel rate. You'll notice a 404 BABIP driving that average up a little bit. So that's why you see projections more in that 260 range. Once you put the ridiculous BABIP into a more normal sort of level, that's what projections are going to spit out in that category. But are we expecting too much right away? Is it fair to take Roman Anthony based on what we saw in basically a half season's worth of big league plate appearances in this cluster?
Oh, wait, did you just fly by Brent Rooker?
No, we're going to get Rooker. I just want to put Anthony next to Langford.
Oh, okay. All right. The Roman Anthony is interesting because if you use these comp ranks, he's 30th and he's going 12th or 13th. Check out the market likes. This is players that the market likes better than the composite projections. Roman Anthony, number 1, a 17 ranking gap. Noelvi Marte up there. Ceddanne Rafaela. Jacob Marcy, I think what you see on some of these guys are like toolsy guys that with speed. I think what you're seeing with a lot of these guys is, these are players that fantasy, managers are saying these are upside players. These are young players. I'm buying what they could be rather than what the projection systems say they're likely to be, and I think you can do that, and you just have to be a little bit careful about when you do that, because you will be choosing to take Roman Anthony where he is over established guys like Mookie Betts is right next to him in the would you rather game. I wouldn't take CJ Abrams over him. That's right there. But, Bryce Harper is there. Bryce Turang, if you want to make sure you get the speed and you get some upside with Turang, plus you get positional juice at second base. Rafael Devers is right there. And if you want starting pitching, Freddie Peralta, Max Fried, George Kirby. So you're foregoing a lot to take Anthony. And while I think, he's a really exciting player that hopefully will, lift the ball a little bit better as he goes forward. But my comp for Roman Anthony, when I look at him, is I just see Christian Yelich. Which
peak Yelich or like,
I mean, like just even some of the way in and way it out, you know what I mean? Like early Yelich hit the ball on the ground too much. He hit the ball really hard, but he hit the ball on the ground too much, right? And that allowed him to have really nice batting averages and OBPs and stuff, even with a slightly higher strikeout rate. And then peak Yelich, turned it into MVP season. So when I make this comp, I'm talking about sort of whole career, which means you may overdraft Roman Anthony if you're expecting him to leap into sort of 25, 30 home run territory right away. Maybe he's, going to be. So if the comp holds and, Christian Yelich, when he had a debut season, he had a couple seasons where he only hit 9 and 7 homers. So maybe I'm being a little aggressive with this. He also had 60% ground ball rate, so that's maybe too much. But, 2016, 2017, Yelich, 21 homers, 9 stolen bases. 2017, 18 homers, 16 stolen bases. You could have a couple years of that for Roman Anthony before he hits like, MVP style Roman Anthony. And then I think you might have overdrafted him if you take him here.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, again, we're in the early rounds, like round 4 of a 15-team league, so there's plenty of quality. There's more established guys if you want them. There's other players at the position even that have done a little bit more already because they've had more time in the big leagues. Even Langford, like I get why Langford goes ahead of Anthony. There's a little bit more of a known commodity there because he's been in the big leagues for an extra year so far. So really interesting player where he's going. I think the best case for me in a redraft league is you're a little old and boring and you want to get a little more exciting in the foundation. I think if you're doing something like that, Anthony at the price is not a complete reach. So you can definitely consider it. Rooker kind of sandwiched in the middle there by ADP right now. fits the bill of a true late bloomer. I mean, finally got the opportunity a few years ago and has run with it. 3 consecutive 30 home run seasons. I think 2025 looked like sort of a typical year for him. But the interesting thing is he keeps chipping away at his strikeout rate. When he had that first 30 home run season in 2023, he struck out 32.7% of the time. I think that led a lot of us to say, all right, yeah, it's a low average, cheap power profile. It'll work for a little while. He cut it to 28.8% and had a better season in 2024, cut it again to 2022, cut it to 22.2%, and was really good, even though he wasn't quite as good as he was in 2024. So, I mean, by the ATC projections in the auction calculator, Brent Rooker is hitter number 21. The price is lower than that. So you're getting a little bit of value if you actually take him in this spot. And I kind of like him if I feel good about the speed in my foundation and just want what I think is everyday playing time with an average that won't hurt me and pretty certain power. I think Brent Rooker ticks those boxes.
Brent Rooker is the first guy, if you use composite projections, that shows up that he's going too late. Composite projections, by using Steamer, the Bad X, and Oopsie, say he's the 9th best outfielder. He should go ahead of Pete Crow-Armstrong, James Wood, and Wyatt Langford. And that's enough for me to think like, hey, I like him. I get extra picks. I get to wait a little bit, but you don't get to wait a whole round. And the one thing that Rooker won't give you much of is stolen bases. And the one thing that everybody we've talked about so far has is a chance of stealing 20 bases. I don't think Brent Rooker has a chance of stealing 20 bases. So Brent Rooker is the first, and we'll start getting them, but he's the first guy where you're like, I took my number 1 outfielder and he doesn't steal any bases.
Right. Well, and again, depending on what you've already done and what's left on the board behind you that you like you may be able to work around that accordingly. I think Rooker ends up being kind of a toss-up with Riley Greene based on the makeup of Riley Greene's categorical contributions. And we'll get to Greene in just a second. But Jackson Merrill, coming off a down year, goes in this range as well. Hamstring injury coming out of spring, concussion in the early part of the mid part of the season, ankle injuries later in the year. And the concussion happened on a headfirst slide on a stolen base attempt. He just slid into the glove, where it was one of those things. Ball was thrown perfectly. Glove receives ball. Jackson Merrill's head collides with glove. So just a really unlucky sort of thing. Despite all of those injuries, though, he was on a low 20s home run pace again. We've got to just stretch out his numbers over a full season. He's clearly an everyday player for the Padres, so long as he's healthy. This seems like a pretty reasonable discount for a guy that was living kind of inside the top 20 overall this time last year.
Yeah. So this is a little bit of a feel and intuition thing that I don't really have stats to back it up, but I just think that Jackson Merrill is going to steal more bases this year. And I guess what I can say is, I said before, there's not a great link here, but 79th sprint speed, some percentile sprint speed for Jackson Merrill. So he's still got that. He had the hamstring injury, so I think he was just favoring it this last year, and that's why he stayed off the stealing. But he stole 16 bases in 2024 and 593 plate appearances. I'm personally writing him down for 12 to 15 this year with a possible up arrow. I don't know. I there's this third year. I love third year players like this. He's done good things under a 13% barrel rate for Jackson Merrill and 43% hard hit rate. For his career as a 19% strikeout rate. There's a lot of stuff that's really good here under the hood. And I think that the projections aren't capturing all of it. I'm going to take the over on the projected stolen bases for him. I'm taking the over on the projected home runs for him. A composite projection for home runs would be 22. I'm taking the over on that. And I think he's really safe when it comes to batting average. He has this really great all fields approach. He's going to make a lot of contact. I have Jackson Merrill, I think, on every team I've drafted so far. Also because he's dropping. You don't have to pay the first couple of round price. Now you're talking about Merrill, the would you rathers in terms of other positionals, or that it's up against Riley Greene, but he's up against Freddie Freeman and Josh Naylor, first baseman I don't want. He's up against Austin Riley, but I have teams where I've gotten Merrill and Riley. So I think that's still a possibility. I don't know if that's going to go away, but that's still a possibility. So I think Merrill drops in certain drafts. If you look at his difference between, he has a 41 max and a 91 min. And I've just been in drafts where he's fallen closer to the 70s and 80s. So again, I guess it depends on if he's on the upper end and he's, going in the 40s and 50s, I don't want him. But if he's going in the 70s and 80s, the would you rathers are fine for me. Over Carlos Estevez, yes. Over Blake Snell, probably. And that's why I end up having him.
Yeah, I think the average projections are coming in a tick light too for a guy that hit 292 as a rookie, has that low K rate, seems to have a nice all-field sort of approach. I mean, 260 is not going to hurt you, 270 is not going to hurt you, but I think the range is 265 to 270. He could easily be 15 points above that again. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I think what we saw as a rookie is kind of like a nice floor for Jackson Merrill in a healthy season. So you're kind of getting good floor that you believe in at the price with the chance of getting a little bit more if you can unlock more power and avoid the injuries here in year 3. Riley Greene is a classic lesson for me in sometimes players just don't develop the way you expect, but they could still be really good in a different way. I didn't think Riley Greene was going to be someone that would run a 30% K rate in the big leagues. I thought he'd be maybe 22 or less in his peak years. 17% barrel rate, though, career high 36 homers a year ago, chased more than he ever has before, 34.2% O swing, which is kind of a surprise. If like generally we believe you kind of chase the way you chase for your whole career, maybe some positive aggression coming in that regard. But he doesn't run much. 6 for 9 on stolen base attempts over the last 2 seasons. And projections have a pretty wide range of batting average outcomes for Riley Greene. The bat X down at 247, oopsie up at 270, just to give you an idea. But I do think it's sort of Brent Rooker-ish in terms of not zero speed, but very little speed, nothing you're really banking on. Everyday playing time, power first, run production second, and then maybe an average doesn't hurt you is sort of the makeup of what he brings. So is there more that Riley Greene can still tap into? Because the key difference between Rooker and Greene is quite a bit younger.
Yeah, that is a good point. 25 years old. That's why he probably ends up, and also the mentioning what you mentioned his batting average projection from Oopsie. He shows up on this Oopsie likes chart. This is the chart of players that Oopsie likes the most over Steamer. Joe Adele's atop the list with a $20 projection versus Steamer an $11. Kyle Stowers these are all from this tier. I'm going to refresh these charts for future outfield episodes, but this is supposed to be guys only in this tier. Aaron Judge has a $7 difference. I mean, Oopsie likes quality of contact. Crow-Armstrong is a person that Oopsie likes more. So if you heard us talk about Crow-Armstrong and you thought we besmirched him, then you like the Oopsie projection. Take that one. Roman Anthony is a $15 player here, and Riley Greene, Steamer says $18 player. Riley Greene, Oopsie says 23. So there's a difference there. Oopsie tends to like the bat speed guys and the young guys. So that's, I think, a lot of what's going on this chart.
Yeah, if you're choosing between Greene and Rooker in this range, who would you rather have, or at any price? Like, just who do you think has a better 2026?
I'm just gonna take Rooker because I think it's safer. I love that park. I think Detroit's a hard park, and I like them both, but I'll take Rooker. I think the batting average, I take Rooker's batting average over Greene's.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too, but very comparable in terms of expectations. If you were targeting Rooker and missed out and wanted a very similar player, Greene, I think, can scratch that itch accordingly. Jarren Duran goes down here. This time last year, he was a toss-up in round 2 against Jazz Chisholm Jr. At that point, I like Jazz a little more than Duran at the price, but I think my overall assessment was do something else because the guys at the other positions in that range were a little bit more interesting. I actually kind of like Jarren Duran at this price. I think the discount is good. I mean, there's still trade rumors swirling, and those will probably just be there all the time on Jarren Duran until something eventually does happen. But like the park, like the lineup, like the balance of categorical contributions that he provides, I think he's just going to do a little bit of everything. And I think 16 homers over nearly 700 plate appearances is more in line with my reasonable sort of power expectation for him. So maybe you don't get much more than that in terms of power, but I think you could get a little bit more in terms of speed like we saw with that 34 steal season in 2024.
I think some evidence that Jarren Duran is in an interesting spot is that the would you rathers read to me like people already kind of looking at positional need too hard, or looking at needs in their team context. So, like, for example, right next to Jarren Duran is Carlos Estevez, who I think skills wise is not in a good place. Fly ball guy with low stuff. Going into a park that's changing with some interesting arms behind him. But, somebody might say, I don't have a closer yet. That's what I read when I see that. You see a bunch of catchers here where people are like, ooh, I want to get on the, catcher one market. It's like Augustin Ramirez and Drake Baldwin. They're great hitters. But to me, I read a little bit of people being like, I need to fill these positions rather than let me just take positional value out and just look at who's the best bat available. I think that Jarren Duran is more interesting than a lot of those guys in terms of, I think a 2020 season seems pretty likely. And I agree that you could even do a 2030 season. So we know that, he's approaching free agency and that he's been on the market. Like, he's either making the argument for staying in Boston, or for an extension or whatever it is. And that there's a little bit of urgency to that matter for him because he's 29 years old. I think that might surprise people that Jarren Duran is 29 years old, and that that's why some of the aging curves may not be in his favor. But he has a lot to prove, and he's a pretty toolsy guy. So I actually like where he's going. I would take him here.
Last of the group is Byron Buxton. Had his healthiest season ever as a big leaguer and showed us that the tools are still really loud. 35 homers. He was 24 for 24 as a base stealer. I think it's his 6th straight season now with a double-digit barrel rate. He's been making great contact for a long time. It's just avoiding injuries, especially knee trouble. That's been one of the more recurring problems of Byron Buxton's career. I just think it's extremely difficult to look at the overall lack of health and then just project another season where he's as healthy as he was in 2025, even though I would love to see it. And I guess I wonder is the market giving you enough of a discount where you're like, you know what, the per game stuff's going to be great. If he's hurt, I go to my bench, I go to the waiver wire, and I just live to tell the tale because pick 75 for a guy with skills like this is actually a pretty good deal.
He was the 46th best outfielder in 2024. Byron Buxton was.
Yeah, he only played 102 games that year.
Yeah.
And even in 2025, he played 126. He missed time and still put up a 35-24 season.
But the 102 games is also his third most of his career.
I know.
So I'm out, man. I'm out. I know it's super exciting. And what if he even put up a 650? My God, it's pretty risky for me. And the projections are all saying, oh yeah, he'll do something he's never done. For the most part, they're saying 560 plate appearances for Byron Buxton, which he's never done. So on projections, what you're doing is you're buying upside. You're not buying the floor. That's what you want to do, is buy closer to the floor, right?
Well, you're buying health upside, and I think that's such an unknown. So I think the main thing I would say about Byron Buxton is clearly has the skills to be actually undervalued where he's going. Risk profile is so great that this might not be enough of a discount, but decide how much of a discount you need before doing it. So that way, when you are building a team and he falls a round or 2 or 3, wherever that sweet spot is, you're actually comfortable taking advantage. That's the way I would look at it. I think if you bring him down one more tier, especially, I think I can get there. But I think everybody in this group going ahead of him makes sense to me, even if they have a little bit of injury risk of their own. I think they all do some different things for your roster that could, get you where you need to go. Ideally as outfield too. Maybe some of these guys could actually be the first of your 5 outfielders though, and you'll end up with plenty of quality from those spots depending on how you fill in. Tier 2B includes Cody Bellinger, Randy Arozarena, Oneil Cruz, Seiya Suzuki, Michael Harris, and George Springer. This
What a
rounds out
tier,
the top
man.
100 overall. This is where I'm like, okay,
This is a wild ass tier.
If I start comparing Buxton to these guys, I'm like, okay, we've got some health risk with Bellinger and some up and down performance risk and
A
Randy
210 batting average
Arozarena.
risk with Arozarena.
Yeah, low average risk with him, low average risk with Oneil
Cruz.
Cruz, even though, I mean, yeah, he hits the ball really hard and stole a ton of bases last year to go with the power, and their lineup's better. Like, you can kind of like say beauty is in the eye of the beholder with this group. So maybe that's the group you're like, okay, this guy versus Buxton, this guy versus Buxton. Or you could just say, nah, I can't do it with Buxton because he's just been too hurt and it's really sad. All that is to say, who do you actually like in this group, if anybody, at their current draft prices? Because they all give me some level of concern.
Oh, there is a clear guy that I was going to save him for my sleeper.
Nah, well, there's no sleeper on this episode. I guess
there's no sleeper on this episode. Okay, well then my sleeper for outfield in the outfield 1 or outfield 2 is Seiya Suzuki, man. I mean, when I look at Seiya Suzuki, there's something I love that jumps off the page, which is every projection system likes him the same. Yeah. Like we talk about oatmeal on this show. Oatmeal normally means a boring player. There was like sort of in his prime Brian Reynolds, a guy that gives you some homers, gives you some steals, advances everything, but isn't a star. I think that Seiya Suzuki counts. It might be sort of high end oatmeal because this is tier 2B, but I just love that he's super projectable. Everything says that the power is for legit. Some disagreement about the steals, but his sprint speed has stayed the same. So I think he could steal 5 or he could steal 10. It wouldn't change his value that much, which is you're going to buy, 28 plus homers with a good batting average and 5+ steals. I just love the floor so much. Like if I can make Seiya Suzuki my second outfielder, I'd be super happy. That's the one that I think, and like for what it's worth, the comp ranks say he should be the 16th best outfielder, and he's going as the 23rd. So, this is a projections play. It's also just super safe to me. So that's why I love Seiya Suzuki this year.
Hey, they say you should be into George Springer in this group as well.
Yes, I'm not so sure about that one.
Yeah, it's the concern that, health becomes a problem again. He's played through stuff, right? The overall trend prior to last season for George Springer was pretty alarming, but kind of going through in order. I know we're already running pretty long in this episode, but I don't want to give anybody a complete, pass or ignore anyone completely. But Cody Bellinger, I think the thing that I keep looking at is the home road splits, and he stayed with the Yankees. He still gets to play half his games in Yankee Stadium, so I'm much less concerned that 18 of the 29 homers were hit at Yankee Stadium, right? I mean, I think he's solid where he's going right now. I'm not worried about year 5 right now. I'm worried about 2026. So I think if you said after Suzuki, who do you think is actually the safest of the 6 players going in this tier? I actually think Cody Bellinger, who goes first of the bunch, is probably the next safest after Seiya Suzuki to hit his projection.
Yeah, he's fairly safe. I mean, the one thing that I just want to point out is there's a $10 difference between Steamer and Oopsie. So depending on what projection system you use or what you feed into the machine, you're going to get wildly different projected values out of Bellinger. And it's all largely due to the quality of contact, which we know is a little bit weird for Bellinger, but we also know that it matches his home park really well. So I don't have a great opinion except that Cody Bellinger goes ahead of Seiya Suzuki, and I prefer Seiya Suzuki. So I would probably just rather take Seiya Suzuki. In fact, if I had them right next to each other and I had to use the pick on one, I think I'd still take Suzuki.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, we see with Bellinger, the steals have sort of tapered off. 9 for 11 in 2024, final year with the Cubs, 13 for 15 last year with the Yankees. So you're probably not expecting much more than that. And maybe the power starts to slip a little bit more too, like a graceful decline, perhaps, for a player that's been extremely volatile to this point in his career. Randy Arozarena, I tried to find lots of reasons to say, like, I'd rather be a year too early on bailing than a year too late. And I really can't find one other than just the projections themselves having that low average, which over the last 2 seasons he's sort of shown us is where he's at, right? The K rate's at 26% each of the last 2 years, and if you're in an OBP league, that changes things quite a bit because he's going to run probably a 330s OBP. That's fine, but a 230s average does ding you a little bit in the category for a guy that will play each and every day. The power, though, career high 27 homers in his first full season with Seattle last year. Power still looks there. 11.5% barrel rate backs it up. I keep looking at Randy Arozarena and thinking maybe I have to like him because other people are scared away, you know?
Yeah, I expected to go down to the StatCast portion of his page on Fangraphs for Randy Arozarena and just find, he's got great XBA, you know, and no, for his career, Arozarena has a 250 average and a 227 XBA. In fact, the XBA has been lower than his batting average in every season of his career. And so maybe he's just earned it. When I scan his batted ball profile, I see a lot of pop flies. And a lot of fly balls, which also, you know, are becoming easier defended in the league. So I guess he's just earned this batting average. And even though the strikeout rate is not 32, 35% or something, it's manageable. Even though he hits the ball pretty hard, this might be just who he is batting average wise. And I don't think that his home park is necessarily going to help him in that regard next year. So Randy is somebody that I've seen other players in NFC or just in deeper leagues struggle to actually play at times, because if they are competitive in batting average late in the season, they may make the decision not to hurt their batting average. I've seen him dropped in leagues, maybe a little bit more 2024 than 2025, but 2024 is the risk. There's a 219 batting average with that 2020 home runs and stolen bases. Like, that's droppable in 10 teamers probably. That's a weird thing to say about somebody going this high, that like they might be droppable.
Well, you just have a couple of 2020, like lower 2020 seasons on the ledger before 27-31 that makes you think, all right, he's on the wrong side of 30. This is probably a later peak, and he's going to start tailing off again too. So I think you can kind of tell yourself whichever story you want. I think the only other thing that's interesting about Arozarena, he was 31 for 37 as a base stealer last year. More efficient than ever. He's always run, but he's always been kind of caught a lot. And I think in order to keep running that much, he has to remain efficient. But you think about Josh Naylor going to Seattle and running a lot more. There's something going on there.
Maybe they're coaching well.
I think there's something going on there that maybe makes that a little safer than it was a couple of seasons ago. So I think if you can take the batting average risk, you might end up okay with Arozarena. I think his foray into free agency next winter is going to be really disappointing, though, because I can see teams being very, very scared of this profile that he has put together to this point in his career. What do you make of Oneil Cruz at this point? I mean, projections say he's kind of like an Arozarena on your roster, so that's probably why they sit next to each other in terms of ADP. We saw a lot more speed last year. I think we saw a little bit of a mixed bag defensively, some signs of improvement in the outfield. So I think maybe they found his long-term home in center field. It's just like, you don't really get tools like this late. You don't get 17.9% barrel rates in the back of the top 100 very often. He was 2 steals away from going 2040, but he would have done it with a 200, 298, 378 line. Like that just breaks my brain in terms of skills and results.
I mean, he earns his bad batting average the old-fashioned way with a bunch of strikeouts, more than Randy Arozarena. 32% last year. You know, it is a legitimate problem for him. But if you look at his expected batting averages, unlike Randy Arozarena, Oneil Cruz has had higher expected batting average recently because he hits the ball so dang hard. And I just focus on the tools. I know that we're approaching the point at which you say, man, is this just going to be a guy who underperforms his tools? And you know, I'm going to make a mistake again this year, but he's 27 years old, and just look at where he belongs. If you put him on a list of big whiffers, even if you limit it to people who strike out a lot, but also guys who hit the ball really hard. I used barrel rate, hard hit rate, and strikeout rate. You know, 2 of the 3 things that Oneil Cruz does really well. And then you take these big whiffers and big hitters and you put them on a chart and you say, oh my God, look at this chart. Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Kyle Schwarber, Oneil Cruz, Byron Buxton, James Wood, and Rafael Devers. I want one of those players. And guess who happens to be the cheapest out of all those players? Oneil Cruz. So I'm in. I actually have a couple, maybe a share or 2 so far. I traded for him in a dynasty league. I'm hoping this is the year. I understand that this could go the other way, and he just has another year where he hits 200, and people say exit velocity doesn't matter, and we have to argue about Oneil Cruz, but I just see, again, my theory of baseball is you have these great athletes, and I think for him, I think he learned a lot last year, learned a lot about his position, as you mentioned, defensively, and I think he's going to come into his own this year. He also is going to have a way better lineup around him. This is like the best lineup he's ever had around him. So in terms of runs and RBI, that should be there, and I could get a 40 steal, a 25 homer, 40 steal guy down here, and if he gets a little bit lucky on the batting average, 230, 240, that's what I've ended up using him for is, oh gosh, I didn't get enough steals in my first, 5 or 6 bats that I had 4 or 5 bats that I took. So
yeah, and you're getting more than steals too. You're probably getting a 20 homer floor. I think you're right. 75 to 80 runs scored and 75 to 80 RBIs seem much more attainable now than they have in past years. Some of the improvements they've made there. So Oneil Cruz, very interesting here. I think you're probably accounting for like a 230 average based on all the projection systems. They're actually pretty good agreement there. 236 to 244 is the range from the sets that you see over at Fangraphs. Last 2 guys before this episode wraps, Michael Harris goes in this range as well. He has been a frequent topic of conversation on this show. I think lower in the order seems likely, of course, with everybody healthy. So you got to factor that in. Defense keeps him in the lineup a lot. Still went 20-20 last year. Still hit 249. It was just the brutal 268 OBP that came with it. And I keep wondering if he's stuck between approaches or what exactly the problem is for Harris. I mean, maybe the 290s we saw those first 2 seasons will never happen again, but a bounce back to 260s and a low 300s OBP is what the projections are calling for. And the 2020 skills do look about as safe as they can for a guy that's been a little volatile.
Yeah, I mean, he has great bat speed. He runs really well. He's a great defender. They're going to play him like, there's a lot to like about this, but he's also like one of the streakiest hitters in baseball. Last year in July and August, he was a 130 WRC plus guy. That means the rest of the season, he was around 60 WRC plus. So he's either 30% better than league average or 40% worse. Man, that is a headache to roster, dude. And I sympathize with anybody who just has put Michael Harris second on their do not draft list. I get it. You suffered through some of those 60s and you didn't put him in for some of the 130s because you didn't believe it and just thought it was a hot streak, and then you missed out, and then he goes back to 60. It's just really hard to do that. But with all those athletic tools and a dropping price, I think he's acceptable here. I would take him over George Springer, even though the projection system says I'm crazy and I need to take Springer. I'm just worried at 37 that the drop off for Springer includes, age-related decline or also just age-related injury, a soft tissue that just takes an extra 3-4 weeks to get back from. That could really rob him of a lot of that. And I know that Harris has some injury history of his own, but again, I'm a sucker for an athlete, dude, and he's a good athlete. So, what if he's figuring stuff out to finally put together that big season? He's in this crew, like him and Cruz have I think the highest ceiling.
Yeah, Harris turns 25 in March, so you think about how quickly they got him to the big leagues a few years ago, and they had that need in center field. That also was part of the development. I could see maybe a league average year at the plate. Again, put up a 99 WRC plus in 2024. Had some injuries that kept him from getting to the 20 homer mark. It's been a strange ride so far, but I think you kind of look at him like Arozarena and Cruz in the sense of, yeah, there's power, there's speed, there's some kind of funkiness with the average right now, but the payoff could actually be pretty big. And I think when you're looking at players like that, guys in the mid to late 20s make a lot more sense than guys on the wrong side of 30. I think that's how I talked myself out of Arozarena initially when I looked at this group and a little more into the Cruz and Harris alternatives. And obviously the option to not take any of them exists as well. You mentioned Springer's age. It's definitely a concern. Kudos to him for finding a way out of the downward spiral of aging. And I imagine, wear and tear sort of piling up on him over the course of his 30s, because he went from a 555 slug in year 1 with the Jays, only 78 games because of injuries that year, down to 472 to 405 to 371, and then bounced all the way back with a 560. It was a 309, 399, 560 season at the plate, 32 homers, 18 for 19 as a base stealer it is just a really, really tough thing to buy into given the age. Otherwise, I mean, there's track record. He's done it before, and it's just hard to tell. It's a little bit like the Buxton situation where you're like, he was so banged up trying to play through it for a few years. Like, why would I trust that he feels good and stays healthy at this age this time around, given that we've got multiple years where he didn't before the monster year he put on the board in 2025?
Everything with him specifically, I can talk myself into. He still has top third running speed, top third bat speed. His chase was an all-time low last year. Like you can tell yourself the story. Like George Springer deserved every inch of what he did last year, and so therefore he should be fine this year. My problem is when I start looking at aging as a whole and I start looking for just how many other people are there like him, so he's going to turn 37 this year. And I found 71 qualified player seasons since 2000 with a 115 WRC plus as he's projected. So that's 2 to 3 a year. Could Springer be one of the 3 best, 37-year-olds this year? Yes, definitely. We know what's a little bit weird though. Things have slowed down for 37-year-olds since 2020. So since 2020, there's only 7. There's only 7 player seasons of 115 WRC plus or better. So that's a little bit more like 1.5 a season. So are we aging worse, or the teams not giving these opportunities? So we just don't even have the chance to see. But then you look at who the guys were. They were Nelson Cruz, Justin Turner, Yuli Gurriel, and Joey Votto. I don't know. I guess George Springer totally belongs on that list. You could just totally see him, being on that list next year. But it is a tough fraternity to get into. I mean, it's literally 4 players since 2000 to 2020 have been better, 15% better than league average in any given season. And that's why Justin Turner did it like 3 times. That's why there's 7 seasons, but 4 players.
Yeah, Justin Turner, a little bit of an ageless wonder in some ways, but I mean, Springer won't turn 37 until September, so he's it's not like there's an obvious cliff otherwise. That's the part that's just weird. It's just the way he got there and not knowing how healthy he was, but even like around not being 100% healthy, 19 homers, 16 steals, 21 homers, 20 steals, and the counting stats alongside that are not that different than someone like a Harris. So I can't take it. I can't take it. It's just all downside. All I see is downside. Maybe I'm just feeling my age. Maybe you're feeling your age. I don't have them anywhere in the early drafts I've done so far, but a little bit like the Buxton situation where I'm thinking through it some more. And people are going to say, why don't you have it solved right now? Because I haven't had to decide yet. I've always had something else I could go do instead. I'm impressed by what he did last year, but I can't fully explain it. And there's just so much weight pulling him back towards a 250s average, 20 homers, maybe lower teens for steals. Still a nice player, but his body could just break down on him fast given his age, I think is my main concern. All right, we got through 100 picks worth of outfielders, so the top 100, so about 20 to 25 players covered today. More throughout the week. You can join our Discord if you got questions for a future episode. That's a good way to send those in. Thanks to everybody who made it all the way to the end. Be sure to like this video, especially if you did that. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.